The opinions and statements made by the guests of the Success in Practice podcast are their own, and I do not endorse or accept responsibility for their positions. Any information given by myself or the guests is educational in intention and not to be taken as medical advice. If you choose to act on the content involved in the podcast, you do so at your own risk.
Okay, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Success in Practice podcast. Today, I'm very privileged to be joined by Tom Kerr. Tom began his osteopathic career in the early 70s, studying first with Robert Bleakley in Orange, and then with Ivan Lallemand and Bryant Lambert in Sydney. After graduating in 1977, he worked in various group practices in Bondi, Paddington and Glebe, before establishing a private practice in Bondi Junction. He's a strong believer in osteopathy as a highly effective allied health profession that is adaptable to the rapidly evolving landscape of healthcare in the 21st century. As I understand, Tom is no longer practicing, but has practiced over many, many years in his earlier days, and I think will be a valuable source of information to the listeners, and just also to get Tom on historical record, because it's one of my it's one of the things that I love about doing this podcast is I get to talk to people like Tom and to get to understand what the landscape was, way before I was born. So that's a real privilege for me. So Tom, thank you for joining me tonight, mate. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me here. Yeah, I appreciate being here. Yeah.
Tom, mate, as with everybody, I always get started with a bit of your backstory. So tell me about you, mate. I want to know about where did you grow up? Tell me about your influences as a young child. Tell me about your, maybe your high school years, and then, what got you into osteopathy? And then we'll talk about your education at that point too.
Yeah, well, I had a pretty eclectic childhood, got to say. Born in London, of Australian parents. Came to Australia for the first time when I was 3. Lived in Queensland as a kid. Moved to Colombia in South America when I was about 9 years old. Lived in the US, lived in Central America over a 3-year period. Went to junior high school in the US, in California. Went to high school in New Zealand on the east coast of the North Island. And I did the last 2 years here in Sydney of high school. So, yeah, bit of a mixed bag there.
Yeah. What made you move around so much, Tom?
Well, my stepfather was a US Marine,
Right.
pilot. Well, they call them aviators. And he was a chopper pilot. And chopper pilots back then were in high demand for things like searching for oil in the Amazon basin. So that was the reason the whole family moved to Colombia.
Right. And okay, so tell us about where did you settle? Like, where did you find a bit of settlement?
Well, here in Sydney, pretty
Right.
well. Yeah.
Okay, and that's where you spent most of your school years in Sydney?
I spent 2 years of my high school, the last 2 years here in Sydney, and that's haven't. I've done a bit of travelling since, but certainly haven't moved my home location to anywhere else.
So what were you like as
few years?
What were you like as a young fellow, Tom? Was there anything that really shaped you in terms of then maybe later on in life, doing some things either with osteopathy or with your current work? Did you find that some things in your personality developed at a younger age, and that
Well,
kind of stuck with you?
having moved around so much in my youth, I learned the value of long-term friendships, I think, because they were very fleeting, we moved so often that my friendships were pretty fleeting friendships, and the ones that have endured, from my teenage years, are ones that I really value because they've kind of lasted all the way through. So like really valuing friendships, I think was something that shaped the way I think about just human relationships.
Right. And I guess moving around a lot, you had to make new friends all the time. Did that
Yeah.
really was that a skill set that you learned?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think becoming adaptable in that way, just out of necessity, certainly shaped, the way I tend to relate to people. And it also had an impact on my practice as an osteopath, I think, because having a bedside manner, for want of a better term, is certainly a plus, I think, when you deal with patients, some of whom really are really looking to you to help them out of a painful or a difficult medical problem. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, well, I guess, and you began osteopathy straight out of high school, or did you do something
No,
else?
I actually did a couple of years of medicine at the University of New South Wales.
Right. So, what got you into that? What made you say I want to do medicine as a young man?
My grandfather was a doctor. He was an army doctor.
Mm.
Someone I never met, by the way, because he died before I was born. But he was an army doctor in New Guinea during the Second World War. The closing years of the Second World War. And he was also a country practice doctor. He had a practice in Peak Hill in the west of New South Wales, which is where my mum was born. So it was definitely something that was sort of part of family history, I guess, to have a doctor in the family. And it just seemed like something that was very much worth sort of thinking about pursuing when I came to think about what I was going to do with my life.
And I guess the requirements to get into medicine in those days, were they something that I mean, were you an astute student? Was that an easy thing for you to achieve?
No, I think I was really lucky. Uh, the very first induction day that we had at the University of New South Wales, the Dean of Medicine stood up in front of 350 students and said, look, I'm just going to explain to you how things work here. There are 350 of you here in first year, and there are 200 places in second year. And in fact, by the end of 6 years, 6 of you in this room today will be graduating as doctors.
Yeah, wow.
So the culling process was unbelievably severe.
Yeah, right.
As you can imagine. Yeah.
Okay, and so how many years of medicine did
I
you end
did
up doing?
too. Yeah. I mean, I was definitely cold,
Right,
if I can
right.
put it that way.
So
Yeah.
then what
But
happened? Did you went out of medicine? What happened then?
well, I worked in a hospital. I worked at Sydney Hospital when it was a public hospital.
Yeah.
And I met someone there who told me about osteopathy. And I think the thing that really took hold of my thinking about, where do I go next, is that he said to me, osteopathy is a profession that you can do with your bare hands. You can actually help people and heal people with your bare hands. And that really took hold of my thinking
Okay.
at that time. So I then explored, ways of getting into osteopathy as a course.
And was that directly straight after medicine, or did you have a little break?
It was about a year break in between, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so when you explored osteopathy, what did you find? Where did you end up?
Well, I found back then they tended to offer like triple graduate diplomas, excuse me, which were DO-NDDC. So there was like a triple offering, for people who
Right.
wanted to do the course. You'd graduate with a triple diploma. The course that I did, I think, offered a DOND, so basically covering naturopathy and osteopathy.
Okay.
But very soon after I began that course, one of the senior lecturers in the course moved out to Orange and set up his own practice there from scratch. And he asked if any of us wanted to come out and basically become master's apprentices, really, is the best way I think I can describe it. And
Right.
so 4 of us bought into that. We moved out to Orange. We lived in the clinic, out the back of the clinic that he'd set up, and we kind of learned osteopathy very much hands-on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was like an apprenticeship.
Yeah, like an apprenticeship. Yeah. So we already had skills in doing massage at that point. So we did all the massage for the patients that came in. We had clients such as the local rugby, the main football team for Orange. A lot of the players became our patients. We occasionally had visiting artists come through, like the West Australian dance company. We offered our services to the dancers, and were given complimentary tickets to go and see their performance. So that was sort of a bit more sort of learning on the job.
Okay.
And that was about a year and a half that I was there.
Mm.
I then came back to Sydney and became a student with Ivan Lallemand and Brian Lambert, who at that point were teaching out of a terrace house in Bondi Junction. Once again, very hands-on, but also giving us a pretty solid theoretical background as well. Because Ivan was very keen to promote the basic principles of AT still, looking at the body very holistically, for example. That was a big part of his teaching on the theoretical side of things.
Right. And so, okay, so Ivan obviously was looking at the body very holistically and also wanting to teach a lot of the principles of osteopathy.
Absolutely.
Can you give us a little bit of a window into that time in terms of what were they teaching? Principle wise, I mean, we have the body as a unit, we've got the self-regulation, the maintenance, and then we've got structure and function. Are they the core principles there that were taught?
Well, structure and function was obviously the bedrock sort of principle, the idea that structure governs function was promoted, but you've also got to be broad-minded enough to think about how that also works in reverse, that if a person is engaged in a profession where the function that they're engaging in, let's say you're plastering a ceiling, as that's your profession, is to be a ceiling plasterer, then your function is going to have an impact on your structure.
Yeah.
And I think I could say that Ivan always encouraged us as students to think about it as a two-way street. Yeah. There's certainly structure governs function, and the idea of working towards getting the body back to an idealized structure was certainly something that we aimed for as osteopaths, but that also we had to be aware that function can have a very direct impact on structure.
Yeah.
And to sort of I guess, have an awareness that in order to do a patient justice, you needed to be broad-minded enough to think about not just here's the idealized structure that I want to sort of try and encourage this body to move back towards, but also to think about taking an adequate history from each patient to understand how their work or their habits or the other things going on in their life might have had an impact on their current state of health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how was that practically applied? Was it done more in a mechanical sense? Did they talk a lot about, the biomechanics of movement and loading and patterns and things like that? Was
Certainly,
that
yeah, certainly all of that. We touched on a whole lot of associated modalities. I mean, we looked at Bowen technique. We looked at muscle testing, Feldenkrais. We just looked at a lot of different modalities. We also looked at other sort of herbal approaches like back flower remedies and all of that. All of those things were sort of like getting a taste of modalities that work together to give you a toolkit, I guess, of things that you could use to apply to any given patient.
okay? So given the
Yeah.
mechanical sense of the body,
Yeah.
was the way that you read the body mechanically, was that
Yeah.
looked at in more of an engineering physics type of look? Was there discussion about,
Oh,
loading and side bending and forces and so
yeah.
forth? Was
Well,
that
it was basically having a technique for being able to do a structural analysis, usually starting with the feet. Well, I mean, getting the person to stand and observing the way they stood, even getting them to, walk a bit and observing their gait, but looking, for example, at the feet as a starting point for doing the analysis and checking out, their arches, looking at the placement of their knees, their patellas, looking at heights for the sacroiliac, working your way up, looking at the spine, checking shoulder heights,
right?
occipital placement, all of that stuff. There was a suggested way of working your way through that structural
Right.
analysis that
And
would give you a pretty good picture of.
yeah, I guess what I'm trying to ask you is that was it like you assess this and you just treat what you find, or was there an attempt to help you link things together in a pattern? Were you encouraged to kind of understand mechanics in a
Well, yes, yeah, okay. Well, the best example of that would be a compensatory curve if you've got a scoliotic spine. So, yeah, the idea that if you've got a lateral curvature in the the thoracolumbar area, you're likely, but not always, but you are likely to detect some sort of a displacement at the top of the thoracic spine. That's a compensatory curve. Yeah, so there was, in that sense, there was the idea that the body, given time, will compensate
and try to regulate.
and try to
Yeah.
keep things, well, try to keep your head,
Mm.
looking sort of, in a pretty flat horizontal plane.
Yeah, well, that's
By
the second principle of self-regulation and healing, right?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there was that. There was very much sort of like the learning was working with patterns, working with strategies for analysis, learning how to take an adequate history, and also all of the things that every osteopath learns, which is, for example, proscription of treating certain diseases. Yeah. Yeah. So to really
Right.
to tick the box for, being able to, practice ethically. Yeah.
And so what was I guess, the criteria of getting through that particular course? Was that something, were they pretty tough on you guys? Brian and Ivan, were they?
Yeah. Well, Brian was very much on the practical side of things. Brian taught us adjustments. He taught us high velocity technique.
Mm,
And like Ivan was more on the theoretical side of things. Brian was more on the practical, hands-on stuff. Not to say that Ivan didn't also teach us a lot about how to do low velocity and high velocity techniques and deep tissue work.
mm.
But Brian was very much more on the high velocity stuff.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So and that was an extra another 3 or 4 years on top of what you did in
Yeah,
medicine.
it was 5 years overall. Yeah, it was.
Okay, so 5 years, including the medicine that you'd done.
No, that was in addition to.
In
Yeah.
addition, right?
Yeah.
So 5 years come on.
Yeah.
You're done. You're an osteopath now.
Yep.
At that time, there's no real registration, is there?
No.
You're qualified.
Registration happened in about 1980.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you had 3. I think from memory, you said that you began in 1977. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
So you had 3 years before registration was required.
Yes.
And so what was that like as a person who was starting out their career?
Well, it was
Take us
like
back.
stepping into the deep end, like it very much so, because I did work with other people initially. We had a good practice in Bondi Road, for example. I worked with 2 other people who had graduated with me. So we kind of were a mutual support group, I guess, where we were all pretty well on the same level in terms of practice experience. And we supported each other, through those couple of years.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank everyone for watching and listening to the podcast. If you have received value from this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel on whichever platform that you are listening on. If any of the conversations have resonated with you and you feel that I can help elevate your practice, you can find me at successinpractice.net. That is, the Success in Practice program can be found at successinpractice.net. The Success in Practice program is the signature program that takes a practitioner who may be struggling with retaining patients. They may not be certain about building effective treatment strategies, and they may feel somewhat anxious and doubtful about what they are going to do with a patient. And they are not really accelerating in the real world of private practice. It takes this practitioner and it turns their careers right around to the point where the patients have an effective diagnosis and a real treatment plan that they can take home. Patients are happy to book in multiple sessions with you and they are confident about your abilities. And more importantly, you now have direction and are confident about your own abilities. The program streamlines how you operate as a practitioner. Guys, you should have been taught this at university, but you weren't. You may have been practicing for the last few years thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be a more effective way of engaging with patients and getting them results. Well, there is. And this is what the program delivers. Go to successinpractice.net and check out the options available to you. See where I can help you easily grow your patient list and finally earn the rewarding income that you deserve. For all the information on how you can reach me personally, check out the show notes. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to the chat transcripts from these podcasts. These are valuable and a wealth of information. I really hope that you're enjoying the podcast. Guys, leave a comment if there's any questions on this episode. And please, don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Now, back to the show.
Okay, so you've just come out. You're a young practitioner. Your first patient comes into the door, and now you're responsible. I mean, you're no longer an apprentice. You're not with you're not over in Orange, and you're no longer an apprentice. How does that feel, and what do you do? I mean, were you well prepared? Were you well equipped? Or did you find that you had to there was a lot more learning to happen?
Well, the other job that I did at this round about the same time was I worked at the Lidcombe Workers Health Centre. So this is a centre set up by doctors. And because of my earlier experience as a kid in Colombia in South America, I had acquired an interpreter's qualification by them. And I worked as a Spanish-English interpreter in that Lidcombe Workers Health Centre, but also occasionally as an osteopath. So it was a sort of like a gentle introduction to practice, interspersed with working to interpret Spanish-speaking patients when they met with the doctor. So yeah, it was a gentle introduction for me in a way. Yeah.
Okay, and was there any anxiety attached to having to treat people and be responsible for the outcome?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I was very aware of that because, as every osteopath knows, compared to a GP, you're going to put your hands on every patient that walks in that door. So there's that direct sort of causal link between you and the patient, which not every GP has. So a GP could, assess somebody, maybe take their blood pressure or whatever, but then make a basic prescription without ever really doing a full-on examination of the patient. So that that's the difference, I think, is that as osteopaths we're very much always going to be hands-on.
Okay,
practitioners.
And so in the beginning of your practice years, how long were you, tell us a bit about that. So what kind of volume were you treating? How long were you spending with patients? What kind of techniques were you using?
Tended to spend quite a long time with patients. Usually do deep tissue work before attempting any sort of high velocity techniques, for example. So I'd give a pretty intense sort of massage, depending on whatever the complaint was from the patient. Trying to work on whatever part of the body really required the attention. So.
And did you attempt to kind of start to think in a more holistic way from the get-go, or were you just trying to get people out of trouble? What was your...
Well, to be honest, I was probably looking at things symptomatically. Yeah.
When did it click for you, Tom? When did it kind of click for you in terms of saying...
That my naturopathic training should be paid more attention to? Is that what you mean? Yeah.
No, I mean, like, when did osteopathy kind of, the principles of osteopathy, when did they start to permeate through your practice, where you kind of went, aha, you know what? If I start looking at the thoracics, the pelvis, I connect that to the lumbars and see how the gait pattern is working in together, I can really help this person, whether it's just... That's going to be a bit better than, say, just doing some deep tissue to the lumbars and an adjustment. When did you start to think a bit more kind of laterally and start...
I think that the more I understood the importance of the history taking, because, excuse me, because I'd go back and I'd look at the history I'd taken after the patient had left, and I'd think, okay, I certainly was treating them symptomatically because they want relief, obviously, from the pain they're experiencing. But I also need to be thinking about how they got here, and how we can maybe look at something further down in the system, which is bringing about the complaint they walked in the door with.
Yeah.
So really, looking at pelvic girdles a lot. Having a look at, for example, with women, postpartum women, looking at how things might have settled or not after the birth of the baby, whether, the SI joints were really back where they were supposed to be, whether things had really settled properly. I think I became more aware of looking at things from that baseline point of view.
And how long do you think that took you to develop as a practitioner?
2 or 3 years, I reckon. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
At least.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that, did you find a growth in your own practice at that particular point? Did that correlate with you getting more patients?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I was never fantastic at doing self-promotion. I think I probably should have taken on a practice manager to do that bit, to be thinking about the way to promote the practice. Yeah. I had a very small little practice in Bondi Junction,
Mm.
in Newland Street, Bondi Junction, and it was basically a studio apartment, really, with a screen between the waiting area and where I did the practice. So, uh, yeah, I was there for a few years, and yeah, there was a yeah, it was something that I didn't put a lot of time into building as building up my book of patients. Yeah.
Okay. And so did that mean that you were seeing maybe what, roughly about 10 people a day? Would that be correct?
No, less than that, probably.
Less
Yeah,
than that.
yeah.
Right. Okay.
Which meant that I tended to spend a long time on each patient. I mean,
Mm.
I'd really spend less than about an hour per patient. Yeah.
And did you find that was there a time where you would see a patient that, say, for example, might have been acute? And I
Yeah.
mean, it's really hard to spend an hour on an acute patient because
Well,
you
that's
tend,
right, because you
you,
get to a point where you think I'm just making things worse by
yeah,
continuing
yeah.
to, yeah, yeah.
So then, what did you do with those? Did you just have a chat to them? Did
Look,
you,
I sometimes I referred them on for an X-ray,
mm,
to sort of see really what was really causing this sort of acute reaction. Um, and because they were so acute, I couldn't really palpate things sufficiently to sort of work out, okay, the probable cause. So
mm,
sometimes I'd refer them on for something like an X-ray to sort of try and sort out what was going on. Um, Other times I'd sort of say, look, you need to basically calm things down here. So I would suggest they get a sort of an over-the-counter sort of analgesic,
mm.
to try and calm things down, and then say, look, get back to me in a couple of days and let's see if things have settled.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I'd
Oh,
treat things like that, I think, with very acute cases.
okay. And so, how long did you continue to practice for? I mean, how long did that practice go on for? How many years were you really
Well,
actively in practice?
the big change came with registration,
Right.
because some of us, some practitioners managed to get registered under a grandfather clause.
Yeah.
They basically said, look, I've been doing this for the last 20 years. Uh, I've always practiced as an osteopath chiropractor, and they were given the benefit of the doubt on, being able to practice safely, etc. And they were given registration under that grandfather clause.
Mm.
People like me, who were more recent graduates, couldn't make that case. So everyone in, for example, the year that I graduated in, was required to do a registration examination, a
Okay.
series of examinations that went for a week.
Yeah.
And
I heard about those, and
yeah, so they were vivas. They were
yeah.
vivas, and we had to take patients. We were given X-rays of patients, volunteer patients, and we had to basically come up with a diagnosis for a series of patients and suggest uh, ways of treating them
Mm.
and a course of treatments, and then demonstrate treatments that we were going to apply to those patients, having come up with a diagnosis of
And
what was the actual cause of the complaint.
how did you find those, mate? The
Pretty
stories.
pretty grueling, pretty
Yeah, the stories
grueling.
I hear is that they were very intense and quite
They were.
difficult to pass.
Yes, yes.
And so I mean, you kept on practicing, so you must have gotten through that.
I did, yeah. I like to think it was by the grace of God, but
Yeah,
and also a bit of nous, yeah. But yeah, it was a very grueling process. We did a lot of prep for it, I should say,
yeah,
because there was also a biochemistry component that
right.
was challenging. Something that I'd covered a bit of in second year medicine
Yeah.
years and years before. But yeah, it was a steep learning curve, right? I
And so
think for all of us, all of us.
you found that that really leveled you up. It took your skills to another level.
Well, at least it gave me a window into how orthodox medicine would be
Mm,
treating the same sort of complaints that
right.
patients were turning up with, right? So being able to understand the language of uh, a biochemistry, I think, gave us a bit of a window into how uh, traditional medical practitioners would be thinking about treating those patients
Right.
and how we might be taking a different approach to it. Yeah.
Okay. And so what was your practice life after that registration time? Like, you said that things changed for you? That was a bit of a turning.
Well, yeah, when they introduced sort of stuff like allied health,
Mm,
that meant that I got a few referrals from GPs that I knew,
mm,
to be treating their patients as an osteopath. Um, I guess I spent the next 10 years more or less in practices. I did join some other group practices along the way.
mm.
I practiced in Glebe with a group called Unnatural Practice in Glebe Point Road. And a friend of mine who'd also graduated at the same time as me uh, ended up having a heart attack at the time. And I kind of stepped in there and locumed for him because
Mm.
I knew that, if somebody didn't keep treating his patients, that he would, once he recovered, that he would be pretty well starting from scratch. So
Okay.
I was locuming for him for a couple of years. Yeah.
Right. And so between locuming, between your own practice and then
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
third practice, you were quite busy.
Yeah, I was busy. I was also doing a master's at Sydney University, yeah,
Right.
in education.
So that was your the PhD that I want to discuss with. That was
I
your
did, it segued into a PhD.
so
Yeah.
you segued into a PhD, and the topic of the
Yeah.
PhD was teaching. Is that correct?
Well, it was the use of intelligent tutor agents
Mm.
in learning. Yeah. So it was like the exciting days of artificial intelligence research, actually. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Okay. And so, um, what made you ultimately not continue that?
A lot of things kind of got in the way. I started out with a supervisor who then retired and handed
Mm.
me over to somebody else who wasn't that interested in my topic.
Mm.
So there were those sort of structural problems in terms of the way the PhD was supervised, which I wasn't that impressed with. Uh, I also, I think I needed a lot more guidance than I
Mm.
received as to how to progress this, towards a full-blown thesis.
And you were still a student at the time, weren't you? Like you were still
Sorry.
a you were you still a student at the time, or had you graduated and practiced?
I was a student in the Faculty of Education. Yeah, I
Right.
was.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right. So you're a student there. You're
yeah.
practicing osteopathy as
I'm
well.
practicing osteopathy as well at the
Right.
time.
And so you decided to do a PhD, and the topic of choice was around information and I guess the gathering of
Well,
information.
it was thinking about how we might use artificial intelligence to enhance learning.
And that was in what year?
That was 1995.
1995. Wow.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see the emergence of AI now, and
Well, well,
the
the World Wide Web was only
mm,
3 years old at that point.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right. Okay. And so you didn't ultimately continue that due to some,
Well,
I guess.
it segued into an MPhil. So I did write up a thesis as an
Okay.
MPhil, which
Okay.
is a research degree. Yeah. So I did end up doing a research project, not
Yeah.
quite a PhD, but certainly something that was thesis based. Yeah.
And so tell us about your experience in research then, and
Yeah.
because some people really enjoy it and some people just don't
Yeah.
enjoy it at all. Tell
Sure.
us about some of the things that people need to keep in mind if they decide to go down that route of research. What do you think are some good
Okay.
tips?
Well, I think anybody that starts a PhD or an MPhil will tell you that it's something that starts broad and then it refines itself down into a focal point. So at the beginning of any sort of research like that, it's important to have a very broad mind about the topic that you're researching. But sooner or later, you need to refine that broad sort of approach to looking at everything and everything that you think might be related to your topic, to realizing that uh, the time that you have to get this thing done is not unlimited, and that the end product is likely to be either a thesis or a thesis as publication, which is becoming more popular these days, where you need to come up with a series of 4 or 5 published articles
Mm,
in reputable journals that all relate to your thesis topic in a very direct way, but also present uh, bits and pieces of research that you've conducted.
mm.
So you have to be very organized in the way you think about how you're going to proceed with the research. And it's always going to be something that sort of starts as a wide funnel and refines down to a very focused topic.
Okay. So then I guess if you're somebody who's going into research specifically within osteopathy,
Yeah,
I mean, it's such a broad kind of area to go into.
sure.
Would you advise that people really actually love the topic that they're in? I mean, this is the hard thing, right? You really got to enjoy the topic that you're
Yeah,
researching.
yeah. No,
Um,
you're right. It's otherwise it's just torture. Yeah. So,
yeah,
and particularly if it's a topic that somebody else has handed to you,
yeah, right.
because that was kind of the way the one that I started was. It was kind of handed to me as a ready-made topic.
Yeah, yeah,
It's sort of, why don't you have a look at this, intelligent tutor agents? And
yeah.
so I sort of bought into it because I was intrigued by it anyway. So yeah,
One previous
but
conversation I had with another osteopath was we were discussing research,
yeah,
and I said that it's always best to kind of be a practitioner out in the world, find something that you think, hey, this is interesting, this is working on a lot of my patients,
yeah,
and I'd like to understand that more, and then
yeah,
that's a really good place to start in terms of wanting to do research. But
yeah.
I think just coming out of osteopathy, coming out of university,
Mm.
and just wanting to be a researcher, I don't know if you're going to,
Look, I agree with you 100%.
you know,
There's incredible value in actually getting your feet wet as a practitioner
mm,
before you think about embarking on a research career, because you really want to have hands-on experience in thinking about whatever that topic is that you come up with to do the
yeah,
research.
we
Yeah,
might be at a point now where we might be graduating academics, like where people are graduating out of university and
yeah,
they're just going into academia after maybe 2 or 3 years of practice.
yeah.
It's a bit more secure financially, and
Well, look, the
that,
other thing that I would say, yeah, is there's incredible value in in teaching some aspect of osteopathy,
Mm.
and which you would know about, you being a teacher yourself.
Yeah.
That the value to you in taking on that role of being a teacher really, I think, solidifies your understanding of the profession overall, and lets you see the connections between
Yeah.
people learning and people practicing. Yeah.
Yeah, and ultimately, even if you are teaching people, the best teachers are always they're always students in their minds,
Yes,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
okay, so along with this this role at University of Sydney that you had, you were
Yeah.
also practicing osteopath.
Yeah.
When did that start to wind down for you? And then when did the new roles in your life begin to take hold? The roles at
Yeah.
Macquarie University, New South
Yeah.
Wales. Tell us a bit about that evolution.
Yeah. Okay. I I was still practicing doing the locuming
Mm,
for my friend uh, in 2003. And at the same time, I was looking to make use of my master's in education that I'd picked up from Sydney University a few years before. So a role came up as an educational developer at Macquarie University, and I thought, well, I'll apply for that, but I'll still keep practicing. And I applied for this role of basically taking courses that are taught at Macquarie University in the arts faculty and putting them wholly online. That was the job that was on offer. And on the strength of having a master's in education, I guess, and having had some experience in developing software, online software for language learning, I managed to get that job.
yeah.
It was a full-time job, but I was still doing a Saturday clinic in osteopathy. And I kept that up for about 6 months, and I found it was just too much. I could not
Mm.
work a 5-day week at Macquarie University and also run a Saturday clinic in Glebe because I'd spend the whole of Sunday recovering.
Mm.
Yeah, it just took a lot. It took a lot out of me to be doing those two roles.
Okay, so that was your.
So I basically stepped back from the osteopathy clinic
Mm.
at that point.
And so that was your first role in a university over at Macquarie.
I had when I was doing the PhD at Sydney University,
Right.
I did teach
Okay.
introduction to educational computation.
Okay.
I taught that within the Faculty of Education at Sydney Uni.
So
Yeah.
right. So that
So
was
I
a
had
teaching
had a
role.
role as an associate lecturer. Yeah.
Okay.
So I
And
had done that.
and I guess the role at Macquarie was more within the actual university structure as someone
Yeah,
who.
I was actually developing courseware. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wasn't teaching. I was working with academics. Yeah.
And you were developing their online systems.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
And that was in 2004,
Starting in
5,
2003.
3. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was the early, and that's still early times in terms
Yeah.
of, we were still dial-up modems and so forth. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Still
know,
pretty early. Yeah.
I think, and so
Well,
what,
these were the very first courses that were offered wholly online at
yeah,
Macquarie University. There was always a distance education unit at Macquarie, uh, but that was not an online thing. It was courseware was mailed out to people. Like people were sent hard
mm,
copy stuff.
yeah,
Whereas the early days of what was then called open learning,
mm,
and which then became known as Open Universities Australia.
mm,
Uh, this was the first wholly online offering at Macquarie University, so it was pretty pioneering sort of work, really.
yeah. And how long were you there for at Macquarie Uni?
I was there from 2003 to 20. It was 13 years, so it was till 2016. Yeah.
Right. And then
Yeah.
you moved to Torrens Uni, is that correct?
No, I moved to the University of New South Wales.
Right, University of New South Wales. And what
Yeah,
was
Faculty of Medicine.
in a similar role?
Similar role, yeah. I was an educational developer in the Faculty of Medicine.
Right. And so obviously people have caught on to the fact that you had a great background in this now. You've been doing it for a while. And you were
Yeah.
helping them take a lot of their courses online.
Yeah. Very
Okay.
similar to what I was doing at Macquarie University.
And that lasted for a few more years, over
About 4 years, yeah.
4 years. And
Yeah.
so that takes us to 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
And then you moved to Torrens University.
Torrens Uni, yeah.
And
Yeah.
you did the same thing there as well.
Similar sort of role. It was the role was actually as a online educational experience designer.
Okay.
Was the actual title of the role. But similar sort of activities that I was engaged in both at Macquarie and at UNSW.
Well, this is now circa 2020. We're in the middle of
Yeah.
COVID, in the beginning of COVID, and technology is now a lot more advanced than when you first started in 2003. So your role now becomes vital in the I guess the survival of your university, because everything is becoming online, everything is
Yes.
becoming access, or everything's becoming
Yes.
need to access right now kind of thing.
Exactly.
Did you find that your role was more appreciated now?
Well, Torrens was very well placed for that because they'd got the bit of a jump on bricks and mortar universities like UNSW and Macquarie. In that a lot of their courses were already taught online. They tended to concentrate on courses like nursing education and hospitality.
Yep.
And they did a lot of stuff with fashion, photography, etc. And there was obviously practical components to all of those courses, but a lot of the basic science stuff was already being taught online.
Okay.
And, so Torrens was pretty well placed to adapt to the new learning styles that came with COVID, with lockdowns and
I guess
from home.
I guess in 2003, people might have viewed your role as a very
pioneering.
It's nice to have, but not our bricks and mortar kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
In 2020, it's a different landscape. You're the bricks and mortar, and everyone else is more the old stuff.
Bricks and mortar was old school. Yeah.
So okay, and where are you now, Tom? What's going on with you now? What are you doing with yourself now in terms of work?
I have my own startup, doing design work. I've got some projects which I've been working on for a couple of years, which have to do with dimensional sound recording, something that has always fascinated me.
So at 74 years, you've decided to do a startup. Is that right?
Kind of, yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Well, actually, it was a few years ago that we started the startup.
All right, I'll give you 70.
So
let's say 70 plus.
Yeah,
right. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
All right, that's
I think it's good to stay flexible. Yeah,
it is definitely
very important to stay flexible.
And so, are you in? Are you still? Looking back at your old osteopathy days.
Yeah.
Are you still in contact with people that you friendships and connections you made?
Well, I've certainly got mentors that I keep in contact with.
Yeah.
One of them is the guy that I graduated with, Kevin Sharp. Kevin had a practice in Bondi Junction for many years. He graduated the same time I did. He went through the whole registration process when I did. So I've certainly been a mentor to me. He's somebody that really helped me to understand low velocity techniques in practice as opposed to high velocity techniques. We did a lot of work together on muscle energy technique, for example, and he taught me the value of that, particularly in acute cases that we mentioned before. When people turn up with acute conditions, a low velocity technique can kind of work well, can be far less traumatic in a way, as a treatment approach for patients who are acute.
Hello, everyone. Just a quick break to give you some information on where to best find me. The first place is the private Facebook group called the Successful Practitioner Pathway. I've set up this private group as a place where practitioners can go and get tips and advice on how to best accelerate their practice and improve their clinical practice skills. The second place to find me is at successinpractice.net. That is where the Success in Practice signature program is housed. You can find more information about me and how I can best help you achieve success in your practice. So, the two best places, the private Facebook group, the Successful Practitioner Pathway, and successinpractice.net. I will link to both those places in the show notes. So, for more information, please see the show notes. Now, enjoy and back to the show.
All right, Tom, I want to take you back to those days as an early practitioner and then probably the next 10, 20 years into that time. The landscape of osteopathy in those days was a lot different than what it is now. The registration board was a dual registration board. It was state based, and it was a combination of osteopaths and chiropractors. And it was, and let's not kid anyone. It was very well dominated by chiropractors.
Well, in fact, at one point it was called the chiropractic board, and we were the add-on.
And I want to ask you a few questions around that. A lot of the things that we take for granted now, imaging rights and Medicare and health funds, we look to we want to see where those started, and I think the genesis of those, or our rights, a lot of the rights that we really appreciate now, I think happened on the backs of that joint registration board model, because there was power in numbers. Is that something that you would agree with in terms of what happened then?
Absolutely. As you said, chiropractors were very well organized and still are. They certainly know how to set up support networks that support their profession. Probably in some ways in a more organized way than osteopaths have tended to do it. But I think when the registration situation started to shift towards a federal model, I think osteopaths sort of came into their own. Once we had a federal board set up, I think it gave us sort of like nationwide registration rights, which I think, that was a big change, I think, because it was very much a state-by-state registration situation before that.
Right. No, I totally get that. And speaking to a few of the other osteopaths of your generation, they all say the same thing, that it was a bit of a farce. You practice in New South Wales, and then if you had to travel to another state to either treat a patient or treat a footy team or something like that, you couldn't, because you didn't have registration in that state.
That's right.
And so the federal model obviously fixed a lot of that. But what I want to ask you is that in that time, chiropractors outnumbered osteopaths in Australia.
Yes.
Quite significantly.
Yes.
Do you feel that we would have been tapped on the shoulder for registration had we not clung ourselves to chiropractors?
Had we not what?
Had we not kind of attached ourselves to chiropractors? Do you think we would have been tapped on the shoulder to be allowed to be registered in a government regulated fashion?
Okay, that's a really good question. Just thinking back to the very early days where people started courses that were going to give them an NDDODC. So they were going to have, 3 different types of professional registrations all in the one thing. I think back then, the distinction between the three professions was something that people maybe didn't really understand in any sort of a deep sense.
Mm.
But the more I got to know how osteopaths differed from chiropractors, for example, in the average time spent on patient care, very different for osteopaths that I practice with.
Yeah.
Compared to chiropractors. Chiropractors could certainly, move through a lot more patients than osteopaths because they tended to have treatment times that compared to GPs, for example.
Mm.
They would have something that, unless it was a first consultation, they would be able to, treat patients in the same time that a short consultation with a GP would take.
Mm.
Whereas all the osteopaths that I knew who were practicing it the way I practiced would rarely spend less than, say, 45 minutes with a patient. So that has a very big impact on the number of patients that you can see in a day. And the level of care that you attach to the way you approach treating each patient. Yeah. So that was a big difference that I noticed pretty early on, the fact that chiropractors were certainly set up to be able to build large practices based on their treatment approach.
And so that gave them more reach, I guess, more
Absolutely.
exposure.
Absolutely.
I mean, I guess the point I'm trying to make and the point I want to get across is that, and I want to learn more about this too, is there's some very basic things that we take for granted now, like registration, like imaging rights, access to health funds, and some Medicare rebates as well.
Yes.
And I think the majority of that was earned when we were a combined registration board.
Yes. Yeah.
Obviously, there's been some also additions once the board split and became more federal.
Yeah.
Things like NDIS has come in, things like work cover has come in, and I guess we've got our own kind of 2 feet to stand on there. But a lot of the things that people really take now for granted haven't been because we've been really well organized, as much as I would love to think that we have been. I think we can do a much better job in developing the rights that we do have right now in private practice. I think we're focusing a lot more on rights out of private practice, like aged care and occupational health and things like that. That's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And I think working in with other allied health practitioners, such as podiatrists, such as exercise physiologists, etc. I mean, because there are plenty of links to those other professions that we can complement as osteopaths.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Not just working with a referral from a GP, but
look, there's been some media attention at the moment given to the fact that I think some of the referral rights might change. Some legislation might come into place where we'll be able to directly refer to an orthopedic surgeon rather than have to go through a GP. So if that happens, that's fantastic, and I think that would be the first major change in rights, really, since the dual registration boards. So, it's been a long time coming. But I wanted to get your take on it because you kind of went through in that time, and you've seen the landscape change. What do you think? What do you think are some of the? I mean, you're probably out of it at the moment, but from what you know already, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing us at the moment in terms of a profession? What do you think some of the challenges are?
Osteopathic education. Yeah,
right.
I think we're fighting a bit of a rearguard sort of action here in terms of making osteopathy available as an educational profession, or just as a pathway, to becoming an osteopath. As you would know, from your own experience with the way you learned osteopathy and how that changed because of a whole lot of changes to the way universities what they decided to teach or to discontinue, etc. So I think it's very important to think of how osteopathy education can move forward. I think it's something that we could really benefit from as osteopaths, sitting down as a group, engaging with the federal council people on, and really having an open discussion about how we can move forward with osteopathy education.
Yeah. I guess one of the advantages of there's many disadvantages of being a small profession, but I think one of the advantages of being a small profession is that you can be at the forefront of making those robust changes that you need to make in terms of advancing things like education. I mean, osteopathy can be one of the first professions to really take advantage of the online platforms.
Absolutely, yeah. I was going to say that we can really take advantage of the sorts of connectivity that AI approaches take, for example.
Yeah, AI, even virtual reality.
Connecting diverse sort of research efforts into a combined sort of research approach.
Yeah, and like I said, being such a smaller profession, you can be a bit more robust in kind of getting together. Going, okay, well, this is what we can do to be at the front of what's going on in terms of technological advancement, and any new courses that we're looking at setting up really should be at the pioneering stage of looking at how we can best deliver medicine.
Well, I like to think that my experience working as an educational developer, has given me some insights into, some really useful approaches to explore in doing that, in exploiting what we've now got in our hands in terms of educational technologies.
Right. Well, that's a good segue into that, because that's why I want to discuss this topic with you. Tell me about that. What do you think? I mean, if you were advising the courses down at RMIT and Victoria University, and there's a new course over at Western Australia that's being set up there, what would you advise them? What would you tell them? How could they make their course robust, engaging, and also attractive and financially viable?
Okay, well, certainly being able to offer basic science courses online is a big plus. I mean, you can learn a hell of a lot of functional anatomy online. It's also very handy to be able to do a lot of it hands-on as well, of course. To really understand functional anatomy in terms of getting your hands on structure, for example. So some of that you're never really going to get there even with virtual reality sort of anatomical courses. You really need to get your hands on an actual skeleton and understand sort of the affordances of muscles connected to skeletons, all of that sort of stuff. But certainly making a lot of the learning available online where practical, and having a structure that can manage that is the key to having a successful course. Something that places like Torrens University is doing very well at the moment. They're running most of their courses are currently run using Moodle as their learning management system, but they are migrating I believe, to Canvas. And the migration process is challenging. But what it does allow people to do is track student progress to the nth degree, if you want to. It provides a means of online assessment for students. But I think the main value of it, of providing courseware online, is that it empowers students to easily track their own progress. Without relying on, say, a tutor or a lecturer to eventually getting around to giving them some feedback on something they wrote or something they attempted to work their way through. That you can, through a well-structured online course, provide students with a means to manage their own learning. And I think that's a very powerful thing that is more and more possible using a lot of the tools that are in use now.
Yeah, and I think leveraging AI as well.
Yes. Yeah.
That's going to be a big one in the coming years.
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And we're touching the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
With all of that at the moment. Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Tom, mate, we've been going for just over an hour, and I want to.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's been a great chat. I want to thank you for your time tonight.
Look, it's been a pleasure.
It's really such an honour for me to be able to have a chat to you and have this on record. And I think I'm really trying to find more osteopaths of your vintage so we can get them on record too. And
well, we're fading away, yeah. So yeah, you better move quick, yeah.
Yeah, we'll try, mate. But if anyone wants to reach out to Tom, I'm pretty sure you're on Facebook. You can search him on Facebook.
Yep.
I will also link to Tom's email in the show notes.
Yep.
So if anyone wants to reach out to Tom,
happy to talk to anyone who's either an osteopathic student or is a graduate or is in practice or whatever. Yeah. Look, happy to talk at any time. Yeah.
So I'll link to that. But for everyone listening, a big thank you to Tom. Tom's staying along with me.
Thank you.
But to everyone else, have a good evening, and I will see you on the next episode.